Good afternoon to all our friends from the media and a very warm welcome to the virtual book launch of Equal. Hope all of you are safe and your near and dear ones are safe and you're taking good care of yourself. Today we are delighted to have with us Mr. Gurcharan Das, who is the coveted author of the trilogy based on decoding life goals through his books India Unbound, The Difficulty of Being Good, and Kama, The Riddle of Desire. As you would have already heard, this is one book I'm going to pick up right away. India Unbound, not unsurprisingly, is an international bestseller, published in 17 languages and filmed by the BBC. It actually narrates the story of India's economic rise from independence to the global information age. A management consultant as well, Mr. Das is a graduate of Harvard University with honors in Phi Beta Kappa and has also attended Harvard Business School, AMP. Mr. Das, as you all know, was formerly CEO of Procter & Gamble India and MD, Procter & Gamble Worldwide Strategic Planning. At the age of 50, he took early retirement to become a full-time writer, much to the delights of his fans like me. Mr. Das is an advocate of high standards of corporate governance and corporate social responsibility at the boards of Indian companies. So without any further ado, I would like to invite our guest of honor today, Mr. Gurcharan Das, to address the gathering and launch the book. Mr. Das, over to you.
Thank you, Vikas. Well, I've been a client of MK Investment Managers for more than a decade, and I have seen them in real time implement sound processes and practices of stock selection that have preserved an investor's wealth. So today, it's a pleasure, an honor to be here to help launch Equal, which is a book that, here it is. It is the book that really does focus on the governance framework which has ensured that low quality stocks have not entered my portfolio or in a client's portfolio. I think the book will help investors understand the importance of governance in stock selection. As someone who wrote the book called The Difficulty of Being Good, I'm happy to see a focus on management integrity. I've spoken about Yudhishthir's integrity in that book. Well, and I've related it to how a CEO practices integrity. Anyway, it's as important as management capability. I think this book is also going to be available in an ebook format, and this information can be found on the website of www.mkim.com. I congratulate MK again on the launch of the book and wish all of you great luck in future endeavors, both people in MK as well as your clients and well as your friends out there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Das, for your encouraging words and kind words. Long-term investing, which involves both wealth creation and wealth preservation, for it is most important that the quality of the management, the integrity of the management, that's the key to the long-term success. And equal risk model is our endeavor in assessing the management capabilities, management integrity, management structure, assessing companies, and then we decide on the investing. It has been more than 10 long years that we have been practicing, evolving in these capabilities. And with the launch of this book, sure, many investors would also benefit from our experience. I would like to invite Sachin, who is the fund manager and who has been following Equal Risk diligently, to share more details with you. Sachin, over to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. And my special thanks to Sir Gurucharan Das for honoring us today and very gracefully accepting our request to really, to inaugurate this book. I also know for a fact that he also has another commitment today with another media house for his views on the current affairs. So before I start the presentation, I would like to say, sir, once again, thank you very much. We really appreciate and we also understand about your commitments. So please feel free to carry on with your commitments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for
Like to
your
start.
time for this launch.
Yeah. Yeah. So before I start my presentation, the slides that I have, let me just give some background about how did this model actually get created, evolved over a period of time. Our basic thought was that we, as financial analysts, we all actually do a lot of analysis on P&L, balance sheet, cash flows, and those are very important and very critical. But at the same time, when we see that there are two companies with similar profits, but they have different P multiples, right? So the valuations are very different, either a P multiple or a EV/EBITDA or whatever valuation methods that one may look at. Companies with similar profit, similar size, yet their market caps could be quite different. And probably one of the big differences to that was the quality, and that quality was about the management quality. So we said, how does one actually evaluate this management quality? Because it's a fairly subjective thing, right? Two people would go and meet a management, and one would say, "Oh, whatever he said was very great," and they talk something great, but the other way say that he was just bluffing. So it becomes very subjective. So our idea was that when we evaluate management quality, can we make it a more objective exercise so that try to get the subjectivity out of the picture as much as one can. That was the basic thought process. So let me just say, help you with some key features that we actually put in place before on the drawing board. So we said that every company, will have a different risk profile depending on its size, because a large company is much more steady versus a smaller company which is much more vulnerable to the external risks. External risk when it comes to doing business, external risk when it comes to having very unforeseen circumstances or events like say COVID or say global financial crisis, those kind of challenges. And small companies stock prices are also much more volatile and vulnerable to the market volatility. So obviously the risks are different in a large company versus a small company. So one thing that we said is we need to differentiate large companies versus the small companies. That's one. Second, within the large companies or within the set of small companies, again, there is a quality differentiation. There could be two large companies, but each of them having a different quality. And how does one evaluate that quality? Because a good quality company will definitely command some premium, and a inferior quality company will have some discount. So how does one differentiate that? That's point one. And second, how much premium and how much discount is something also very important to evaluate. So, what we said is that we would like to capture certain points which are not captured in a typical P&L or a balance sheet analysis, right? Or a cash flow analysis, right? Because we are talking about management quality here. So we said when we talk about management quality, let's look at management integrity, management capability, distribution of wealth to minority shareholders, and investor communication and liquidity. So we actually basically said let's have these 5 basic points where we could evaluate companies on multiple parameters. The other very important thing that we said is that it should be on publicly available data points. whatever evaluation that we do for each and every company should be available for every company. So basically those companies have to disclose those data points on mandatory basis, either by exchanges or SEBI rules or whatever. So, so so that there's an apple to apple comparison across the companies. We also said that, one of the very important things when we invest is that it's about avoiding mistakes, right? And particularly avoiding silly mistakes. We have done a lot of mistakes in the past. How do we do not repeat those mistakes? We would have seen so many examples in the past where so many companies have done serious blunders. How do we learn from them and make sure that if there is a similar kind of event happening in another company, that really comes out as a red flag for us? So we also jotted down a few red flags so that we do not want to invest particularly in those companies, so that we avoid any silly mistakes. So I was talking about sorting of companies. Now, we all know the SEBI rule has also come in terms of the large caps, mid caps, and small caps, which came in less than 2 years back or 2.5 years back. We had already evolved that model nearly 10 years back, as Mr. Karma mentioned. So, what we said is that the large cap 1 category, which is the top Nifty companies, the top 50 companies, will be our large cap 1 category. But when we actually had done this model 10 years back, we realized that the 70th company's market cap was very similar to the 50th company. So we said top 70 companies will be our large cap 1 category. 71 to 125 will be the large cap 2 category. The mid caps will be 125 to 250. Small cap 1 will be 251 to 400, and small cap 2 will be 400 to 600. These are market cap rankings. And the idea is that our investment universe will be limited to the top 600 companies. Since we are doing listed equity investing, we would like to avoid going significantly below this number, because most of the companies which are in the range of the ranking of 500 to 600, they have a profit in the range of 50 odd crores or 100 odd crores. And companies below that have profits in the range of 10, 20, 30 crores. So we said that if we are doing, listed equities, having companies with 10, 20, 30 crores of profit may become more like private equity investing, whereas our investors would like to do in listed equity space. So we, have put our universe as top 600 companies. The other important point was that the management integrity, the management capability, wealth distribution, communication, and liquidity. These were the 5 big heads under which we wanted to evaluate the management quality. Now, how do we evaluate this? So we jotted down a few parameters under each of them. And the weights that you are seeing right now next to each of these parameters or each of these heads were not pre-decided. They actually are an outcome of this particular slide. So what we said is that when we look at management integrity, we would like to see how the management has performed historically, right? What has been their action points? Have they really walked the talk? So, we said promoter holding over here. So when we talk about promoter holding, the maximum allowed in a listed company by SEBI today is 75%. So, the idea is investing is actually a game of probability, right? And we would like to reduce our probability of going wrong. So from that perspective, we said higher the skin of the promoter in the game, lower the probability of they doing something silly. So we said any promoter which has a holding of 70% or more, we would give the highest marks of say 7.5%. Promoters having holding of less than 30% would probably get 0% weight for this particular parameter. If they have a promoter holding between 30 to 50%, we'll probably give them 2.5%. If the promoter holding is between 50 to 70%, we'll give them 5%. Has the promoter holding increased or decreased? If they would have increased their holdings, we would look at as positive over the last 2 years, and we would give them positive marks. If they would have decreased their holdings, we would look at as negative, and we would give them some negative marks. Equity history. Now this is again very, very significant, because a lot of companies tend to dilute their equities quite regularly and also in a substantial way. Now that is quite detrimental to the existing shareholders in a lot of cases. So, if the business model is strong enough and if it generates high ROE and high, ROCE and cash flows, it is good enough for the business to reinvest that business, to reinvest those cash and keep on generating higher growth. But because the ROEs and ROCs are lower, the businesses have to dilute their equities. And that is not a very good sign. So companies which would have not diluted their equity over the last 3 years, we would probably give them full marks of 7.5%. Would have diluted probably up to 10%, we'll give them 5%. If the dilution is very high, say 30% or so, we'll probably give them 0 marks. So and so forth. Like there are other promoter holding pledged. Now this is again a very important learning that we've had since the Satyam days. The promoters of Satyam had pledged their holding significantly, and that really led to a major downfall of that stock price and also the business, and a lot of challenges that came out from the balance sheets later on. So that's also one of the big red flags for us. But we also understand that for some reasons the promoters will have to pledge. So up to what extent are they pledging is also important. So if they pledge up to 10% of their current holdings, we are okay, we'll give them full marks. But if the promoter holding pledged is say more than 70% of their current holding, that's definitely a big red flag, and we would like to avoid investing in those companies. Promoter group salary. We have seen some companies where promoter salaries as a percentage of profits is a very high number. We definitely believe that that's detrimental to the minority shareholders, and we would like to give some negative marks for that too. Auditors, are they among the big fours? Are they known? Are they unknown auditors? That's also very important for us to evaluate. So like these are some of the things that we are evaluating for management integrity. On management capability, what we said is that we would look at some of the balance sheet data points, because every business goes through a good and a bad cycle, and how has the management taken care of it during a bad cycle gets actually reflected in the balance sheet, because that's a cumulative of so many years. So how is the debt equity ratio? How has been the unhedged foreign debt? We've seen so many companies in the year 2008-9 during the global financial crisis had serious challenges because of their unhedged foreign debt. Debt restructuring. Companies who go debt restructuring, not a very great sign of the management capability, the way they manage their business during the down cycle. We have also seen incidents where companies have gone debt restructuring not once but twice. Now, these companies tend to have this, habit of doing a lot of over leverage, or they are doing something which is not very good for the business. So, from that perspective, again, debt restructuring is something that we are very much focused about. Capital cost efficiencies. Now, this is again a very important parameter. How when a company goes for a very large capex, and during that capex, how efficient that capex has been compared to the pure industry benchmarks, right? Like suppose somebody is putting up a cement plant, has that costed them $100 million per ton? Has that costed them $100 million? Sorry, $100 million per a million ton, or has it costed them $300 million? So versus the benchmark. So those kind of parameters have to be evaluated to understand how efficiently the management has actually done their capex plans. So, like this, there are various parameters. Say, for example, in the wealth distribution to minority shareholders, dividend payout has one of the highest weightages in our model. It's almost 10% at this point in time. So, companies which are 70% or more dividend payout, we give full marks, because that speaks of two things. One, that the business model is so strong that it generates a lot of cash. It not only generates profits, but it also generates a lot of cash. Second, the company is able to pay out that cash, also speaks that the business model doesn't need the reinvestment for future growth. The business, like for example, large FMCG companies like Nestle, Hindustan Lever, they all have payout ratios of upwards of 70%, and they continue to grow because their business is on their franchisee value, on their brand value, rather than in the plant and machinery. So that's why their ROICs are also very high, upwards of 50, 60, 70%. And they can actually afford to pay out entire profits to their minority shareholders without compromising on the future growth. That's a very important parameter. The other thing is large acquisition. We have more often than not seen that large acquisitions actually do not play out the way they are anticipated at the time of acquisition. So that's a red flag for us. And what is a large acquisition? We identify that if it's more than 50% of your current balance sheet size, that's a large acquisition. So then that's a red flag for us, and we would like to wait out for at least 1 year before we, evaluate to further invest in that company. So all these parameters will give us some score, and then over and above this, we would also look at some of these points. And if one of them is also there, then we would not like to invest. So, for example, promoter holding pledged, say, above 70%, we would avoid investing in these companies. Promoter group salary is more than 50% of the PAT. We would, be very wary of investing in these businesses, because clearly the minority shareholders are not, getting considered over here in that sense. Debt restructuring of more than once in life of the company I mentioned earlier. Debt equity. We have seen companies who are over leveraged. They do have challenges as soon as there are some, external vulnerabilities or external environment getting a bit challenging. So debt equity of more than 2.5 times, we would avoid investing. In last 1 year, if a large acquisition has been done, which is more than 50% of a balance sheet size, we would not invest. Another important thing is that a lot of companies which have good business models, but they do not have any investor communication. Now, then it becomes very difficult for us as research analysts to invest, because unless we get the right information, becomes very difficult. So if there is because there are a lot of multinational companies which have good business models, good cash flows, but there's virtually zero investor communication. In fact, even the annual reports do not mention much about their future plans, about what happened during the last year, how did the business grow, what were the challenges, what are the opportunities. Unless we have those understandings from the management, it becomes very difficult for us. So we would like to avoid investing in those companies also. But companies which do not fall in any of these categories will be part of our investment universe. Now, at the same time, when we say we would have some score, so for example, we have a company with a score of, say, 65% on this particular model. When we score that company, we will have, say, 65% marks. Now, another very interesting thing while we were doing our research is that we would like to buy stocks at a good purchase price. The risk reward has to be in our favor when we are investing in good quality companies also, because everything is good at a price and everything is bad at a price. So from that perspective, we would really like to see that our purchase price is a great purchase price, because in long-term investing, that is also a very important criteria, along with buying a good quality company. So when, say, for example, we said that when we are investing in equities, one of the important criteria is that we should earn higher returns over the risk-free rate. Because if today the India 10-year GSEC is at about 6%, then our return from the equities should be risk-free rate plus the equity risk premium. Now, generally, that could be a bit subjective, but internally the way we look at it is that we would like to earn anywhere between 2 times to 3 times of the risk-free rate. So today, if the risk-free rate is about 6% or 6.5%, we would like to earn at least about 18 to 20% kind of returns when we invest in equities. But every equity stock is different, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of its size and also in terms of its quality. So on the model of equal, suppose a company gets a score of anywhere between 70 to 85, we would consider that as an average company. If it is 85 and above, we would consider that as an above average company. And if the score is between 50 to 70, we would consider that as a below average company. But companies which score below 50%, we avoid investing in them, right? So let me explain with the next slide a little more with an example. So for example, if we say that our base return for an average company, and that too if it's a large cap one company, say, is 20%. So the companies which have a score between 70 to 85, and if it's a large cap one company, we would like to expect 20% returns from that company, right? And accordingly, we would adjust our purchase price so that we do believe we would perceive that we will earn 20% returns. A company which is a large cap one category but has 85% plus marks will be happy to earn a return which is lower than 20%. So say for example up to 15%. So there we are happy to buy at a little higher purchase price. Companies which are between 50 to 70%, which is below average, we would like to earn higher returns higher than the average. So if the average return expectation is 20%, we would like to earn say about 25% return, and so on and so forth. As the size of the company goes smaller, the return expectations will also increase. As I mentioned earlier, that as the companies become smaller, the risk also increases. So the return expectations have also to be a bit higher. I will just also, we have run this model on the Nifty companies, and as you can see, a lot of Nifty companies are actually scores of about 85, 85%. Companies like TCS, Bajaj Finserv, Bajaj Finance, Nestle, HUL, Infosys, all of them have higher scores of 85%. Companies, there are some companies which have scores between 70 to 85%. So obviously for those companies, we would like to earn a bit higher return, and effectively we would like to buy them at a slightly small lower prices. So that was about our equal model. I also understand that quite some of you would like to have our views on the market. So let me share that also. I have got these three tables out here, and Indian equities in the last 8 years, as all of you can see, have delivered, in the Nifty companies or the large cap companies have delivered returns compounded of about 13%, whereas the mid caps and the small caps have delivered a return of about 16 to 17% over the last 8 years compounded. So the mid caps and the small caps have generated at least 3 to 4% extra returns over the large cap companies, and probably rightly so. As I mentioned earlier, the smaller the companies, the return expectations should be higher, and they generally tend to deliver higher returns over a longer period of time, right? If you see in the last 5 years, the Nifty companies and the mid caps and the small caps all have delivered returns in the range of about 14% compounded, right? So the differential or the extra returns that the mid caps and the small caps typically earn have not actually got delivered in the last 5 years. If you see the last 3 years compounded returns, actually the Nifty and the Nifty companies have delivered about 13% returns, whereas the mid caps and the small caps have delivered returns in the range of about 7 to 8%. So there is a substantial lower return from the mid caps and the small caps. The point I'm trying to make here is that if the history has to repeat itself, that over a longer period of time, the mid caps and the small caps will actually deliver 3 to 4% higher returns over the large caps, then in the next 5 years, there's a very high probability that the mid caps and the small caps will outperform quite significantly. There is also certain fundamental points or fundamental developments at the ground level which are also helping, which are probably pointing that this kind of recovery in the all-round economic recovery is very much possible. So one of the very important things that has happened is that during this COVID, actually it's turned out to be a catalyst for a lot of corporates, because what we saw in the Q1 and Q2 of FY21, that there were huge cost efficiencies and balance sheet disciplines across companies and across sectors. Now that is going to play out quite beautifully over the next 2 years, because we will see a lot of operating leverage because of cost efficiencies and cost savings, and we will also see a lot of cash flow generation because of balance sheet discipline from companies over the period of next 2 years. Now that will help companies think about doing further capex, because they will have higher profitability, they will have higher cash flows, which will allow them to think of doing further capex. And if that happens, as an economy, we could actually get into a virtuous cycle. The other important thing what happened during the last 12 months in the COVID is that the smaller players could not come back with their supply side. Effectively, the unorganized market actually lost market share to the organized market. And most of the listed companies are actually part of the organized market. So they have actually gained huge amount of market share over the last 12 months, and probably they will continue to grow because they had the entire wherewithal, whether it's the financial muscle, whether it's the management bandwidth, whether it's their systems and processes of all these years coming into play, and the logistics, helping them in a significant way, which has really allowed them to gain market share in the last 12 months over the unorganized market. And as we all know, in India, unorganized market is a very large proportion of economy. So even a few percentage gain for the listed players is quite significant. The other important thing what we saw is that the rural India, which had green shoots in the end of calendar year 2019 and early 2020, actually were very true, and they really came back very strongly after first 2 3 months of the lockdown. And that is where the ground level demand was very very strong in the second half of FY 2021. The other very important development that has actually happened because of COVID is that a lot of countries which were importing significantly from China have genuinely now started looking at alternatives, and India definitely does appear in their scheme of things. And in some of the industries like specialty chemicals, auto ancillaries, textiles, we are actually seeing at the ground level that these are culminating into large orders and also large inquiries. So this is going to also help a lot of companies for their export businesses over the next few years. uh, the digital adoption has also been another very efficient driver for businesses, and which is going to drive efficiencies over the next few years, actually, if not long. Actually, it's probably the most biggest paradigm shift that we see. The businesses are going to become very, very efficient. So these are some of the very important things which makes us believe that over the next 2 years, economy should do very well, and the corporate earnings growth will also be very very strong. Effectively, the equity market should deliver very strong returns. Thank you so much. I think I'm going to pause myself here, and probably we will have some Q&A session.
Thank you, Sachin. I think I've heard you speak a few times earlier on this model, but each time you go through it, there's a further nuance one gets. I think this was very well presented. Um, People who want to ask questions can put it in the Q&A box here. We'll be most happy to take question and answers. So Sachin, till the time we get the question and answers, I think I was listening to you. This model which you have implemented, uh, what has been the output of that? In terms of your portfolio, and I'm talking in terms of the management which you've got. You talked about Satyam, but Satyam is now something which is a global example. Everybody knows about it. So, are there any learnings you've had from avoiding certain managements, or you've been able to steer clear of certain management? Would you like to share your experience till the time we have some questions coming?
Sure, Vikas. Thanks for that. So, first thing is that we are present in this model after 10 years of our experience, right? So, the confidence actually comes from is that, in the last 10 years, whatever investments that we've made in our portfolios at EIML, both in our PMS as well as AIF, we are very proud to say that we've not had a single blowout when it came to corporate governance, right? And as you know that in this 10 years, we've seen probably at least 50, 100 companies where we've had serious challenges on corporate governance, and happy to say that we've had none of it. And not only to say that our current portfolio, if any stock which has entered our portfolio, which may not be today a part of our portfolio, we would have exited as a part of our profit booking or for one or other reasons, but none of those companies have had any serious challenges on the corporate governance. So that is a lot of satisfaction and a confidence to us that this model is really steady, has held us very steady in all these years. So that's the first experience, I would say. The other important thing is that I spoke about the risk reward matrix, right? So purchase price discipline is also goes a long way in giving returns a little better than the markets. At the same time, not compromising on the quality. So the model starts with saying that we will not compromise on the quality, we'll only select the quality stocks. At the same time, we want to earn returns which are little higher than the market returns, right? So for that to work, we need a good purchase price, and this model has really helped us in determining that purchase price. So that has been another very good learning, that purchase price also plays an important role. In fact, it's one of the key determinants for how much return we'll earn on.
Interesting. We've already started having questions coming in, but when I heard you talk about the equal model, immediately what comes to my mind is an analogy in terms of organic health food. It may not taste as good at times, but it's extremely healthy for your body. Likewise, avoiding dodgy managements may or may not be very rewarding in the short term, but over the long term, it's definitely healthy for your portfolio. So thanks for that. Panelists, you can raise your hand in terms of the chat box and I will reach out to you. But there are two questions which have come in from Praveen Palande. He's mentioning it's a good session. First question is, over 10 or 15 years, what has been the difference between mid-cap returns and large-cap returns from your assessment of the portfolio? And two is, can you talk about the impact of promoters' salaries, especially in small companies, on share price?
Yeah, thanks, Praveen. Thank you so much. I think those are very, very important points that you made. So, the first thing is that, the mid caps and small caps, as I showed in one of my slides, that typically should generate at least 300 to 400 bips of extra returns over a longer period of time. And that has been the case, at least in Indian equities, I can say so, over the last 15 years or so, for sure. So, and that's a very fair expectation also, because smaller the companies, higher the volatility in the stock prices, higher the risk of those companies in terms of actual ground level businesses, because they are much more vulnerable to the external fluctuations or external challenges. So as an investor, me to expect that kind of extra return is a very, very fair expectation.
He's asked another question, but related to this question, he's asked two more things. What is the standard deviation for long term from mid caps and large caps? And what makes you think that a 3% difference will last in the future?
So, Praveen, the standard deviation number, I don't have the exact statistics number at this point in time. But in terms of why would it last, again, market is a great leveler, right? And what we have observed all these years is that there's an invisible hand in the markets. When markets are falling one side, there is always at some point in time, you will see that markets create a bottom and then there's some buyer coming in. Nobody knows who's buying. There's an invisible hand. And it exactly happens on the other side also. When things get overheated, there is, everybody is very positive, but then somebody is continuously selling and markets create a top over there. Now, this invisible hand, typically what my experience has been, gets formed with the return expectations. So, the collective wisdom of the investors, right? That collective wisdom of the investors will say that if it is Infosys, I'm happy to earn a return of 12 to 15%, which is 2 times of your risk-free rate. But for a similar IT company, but if it's a mid-cap, small cap, I want to earn a return which is about 20-25%. So the stock price would probably fall that much more. But because you are buying at a much lower price, your return expectations or your actual return deliveries will be much higher than Infosys over a longer period of time. The only one condition is that the management quality is not compromised. Okay. And second, the business does grow. It may be a small business, but still it has to grow over a longer period of time. So once these two conditions are met, typically you will earn a higher return in the mid caps and small caps over the large caps.
I've got another question coming in, which says that post-COVID, this is from Anand Adhikari, Business Today. Post-COVID, ESG investing is also gaining some traction. We have some ESG-linked mutual funds already. As we know, the funds are always focused on the G part of investing long-term in companies. He would like to understand the S and the E part when it comes to investments. Are you building ESG in your portfolio? So the long and short of it is he's saying ESG is something which is already gaining momentum. Everybody talks about G and you are also talking about G. What is your view about E and S and how it can be incorporated? I hope I've summarized it right, Anand. Sachin, over to you.
Yes, Anand, I think very, very pertinent point. And I think E, which is environment, social, sustainability of the businesses is completely linked to it, right? We are all talking about why are we talking about ESG? It's basically about sustainability, right? So I don't think we can run away from that. And we have seen this over a longer period of time. I mean, ESG is now coming as forefront, but companies which were always focused on sustainability, I mean, so many if you read the annual reports of so many large multinational companies, they have been talking about this, so, renew, well, they say recycling, right? Recycling is very similar to that. I mean, so many balance sheets will talk about, I'm talking about 10-year-old balance sheets also, will talk about recycling of their water, recycling of all the resources, actually recycling of power, the steam power, and a lot of things they keep on doing, which is about sustainability. So environment is the key thing for all of us to sustain. And global warming, what we are all talking about. So as a country also, we sign certain pacts that we will not produce more than so many carbons. And then there is a the carbon credit policy also for people who do not do it. So I think all of that is very, very critical. And as more and more we evolve, and as more and more we get awareness across investors and company management, I think this is going to be a part of general business practice. So I don't think there is any running away from this.
In fact, Anand, if I can just add to what Sachin is saying, when I looked at this particular product as an investor, what appealed to me was the fact that the criteria is fairly streamlined. It's very well defined. There's no opaqueness. It's very clinical. It's very objective. In fact, a couple of the FIs I've been speaking to have actually told me that at this point of time, probably this equal model is one of the most nuanced models they've seen in the country at this point of time. And the best part is this is publicly available information. You just have to put your nose to the grindstone and hunt for this information, and you'll create a score. And that is what I really loved about this particular one. Sachin, anything else you would like to add, or should we move on to the next question?
No, because I think what you said is absolutely right, dot on. And that has been our endeavor from day one, that it has to be an apple to apple comparison across companies. And for that to happen, we need to have publicly available data points so that it's all the same data points for every company.
So there's another question which has come in, which is quite interesting. They're saying that you've talked about purchase price discipline, but in effect, you're also probably flagging off an exit price discipline in your portfolio. Is the understanding correct?
Can you repeat that? Sorry, Vikas?
What he's saying is that you've talked about a purchase price discipline, which effectively means that if you reach a certain rate, does that also flag off an exit price discipline?
Absolutely. No, absolutely right. So it will be exactly on the other side. Say, for example, if I say that my return expectations when I want to own a stock or when I want to buy a stock, I need to have at least 2x risk-free rate. Now, if once I've already owned the stock, and over a period of 3 years, the businesses also grow or they also evolve, we have to keep that in mind. So at that point in time, what is my return expectations for the next 2 years is something that I need to evaluate because this is investing is a very dynamic. It's a regular exercise that we have to keep on doing every quarter, every half yearly, every yearly, and figure out that where are we headed. So after 3 years, if I believe that for the next 2 years, if my return expectations is going to be probably, just about or probably lower than the risk-free rate, then it doesn't make sense for me to be invested in that business. I need to exit that business because might as well put money in a risk-free bond, which, why should I pay for equities? Why should I take the risk of equities, right? Or look for an alternate equity where I can actually invest, where I expect probably 2 times of risk-free rate at that point in time. Because markets are not always efficient. They do give you those opportunities in patches. And also, I have observed that there are phases when a lot of large caps are overvalued and mid caps and small caps are not so overvalued. A case in point is, if you go back to say January 2020 to say March 21, okay, and I'm talking about January 2020 because I'm not considering the March 2020 month when the markets had dropped 30%. So I'm talking about prices to look at pre-COVID. So from, if you take the pre-COVID January 2020 to March 21, which is the 15-month period, right? In that period, the large caps, which is the Nifty, would have grown at about 15%, 1.5, right? Whereas the mid caps and the small caps have grown about 30 to 45%. Effectively, what I'm trying to say is that in the calendar year 2019, the mid caps and the small caps actually became much more cheaper in terms of valuations, and which is where there was an opportunity for one to invest at that point in time, probably from large caps to mid caps. So those kind of opportunities will always be there, and that's how we will have our exit strategy also on this model. You're absolutely right.
One interesting question which has come in is what has been your learning on this model over the last 1 year during the pandemic?
Yeah, so again, very, very good. See, if you go back to March 2020, April 2020, our portfolios, like everybody in the world, I'm not talking India, everybody in the world, all global indices were down 30%, 30, in one single month, right? And it looks like a complete doom day. There's a lockdown. None of the businesses are working. They have all the cost on their heads. And where are we headed? Right? Nobody knows. So this model had helped us that all the companies that we own were fundamentally very, very sound companies. You know, the debt equity point that I talked about in the model really hold it very well at that point in time, because lower the debt equity. In fact, a lot of our companies are debt-free companies. So we knew that they will be able to survive this. And when the times again turn better, when there's a tailwind, they will make up for this entire downturn, right? So, you know, having a strong management bandwidth, we know that they will find their way out, right? So that confidence we had, and that's why we holded on to our entire portfolio, barring of maybe a few changes that we had to make, because the business models were becoming challenging at that point in time. But as far as the balance sheets were concerned, as far as the management quality was concerned, we had a lot of confidence, and that's why it allowed us to, you know, right that time, the nearly 80-90% of our portfolio. And not only and we were actually always fully invested. So if we would have changed our portfolio to the 10-20%, we would have found another business which was part of the equal framework, and that is what really allowed us to go through that tough times.
Interesting. So I think the learning which I'm getting from listening to you is that while this model is fairly robust, it is equally dynamic to incorporate market realities. It's not something which is something which is like a rule of law and nothing can be changed. I think it's fairly flexible in terms of what is happening, but at the core it's very robust, and that is the reason why you've been able to stick to management. I must also mention here, at the cost of sounding a little bit promoting our fund, that this model has enabled us to deliver performance across all our strategies. In fact, our AI strategy recently won an award for the best performance. And I think it is primarily got to do with the processes in place. The processes have always been strong. The conviction has always been strong. And I think the performance and the awards have just been an output variable. I think that is what we are really very proud about. Let me just see if there are any further questions. No, I think there are no further questions. We'll just wait for a minute or two. If there are no further questions, I think we may be able to wind up today. So if there are any questions, you can raise hand. I can reach out to you, or Okay. In case you have any further questions, you could reach out to us through our PR team. You can reach out to me personally. I know most of you. It'd be a delight talking to you. I'd like to thank Mr. Karwa for being part of this. Spent his time inaugurating this. It's a matter of great pride for Enclave that we have finally managed to take this model, which personally we all believe very strongly in, and we think it's a watershed moment in the investment management fraternity, to have something like this, which can become a gold standard for evaluating corporate governance. Thank you, Sachin. This was a lovely presentation. And like I said, there's always a nuance which I pick up, when I hear you talk. Thank you for the MK Investment Managers marketing team and the PR team for organizing this, and to all my friends from the media who have taken your time out and come for this launch. Thank you so much.